Nina Carter thought she knew what rock bottom looked like, until the night a monster in an expensive suit shattered her fingers like twigs, all because her mute 7-year-old sister had witnessed something she was never supposed to see. What Nina didn't know was that her sister's small act of kindness 2 years earlier had caught the attention of the most dangerous man in the city, a grieving mafia boss who'd lost everything and was about to make Nina an offer that would either save her life or destroy her soul. When Alessandro Vitale stepped out of that black sedan and claimed Nina and Emily were now under his protection, Nina had no idea she was about to enter a world where love and violence danced together in the shadows, where a man's tenderness toward a broken child could be more dangerous than his enemy's guns. But Victor Mendez wasn't done with them yet, and when he came for Emily, Nina would discover that sometimes the only way to save your family is to trust the very monster you swore you'd never love. The question wasn't whether Nina would survive the war brewing around her. It was whether her heart would survive the man determined to win it. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this story of protection, redemption, and impossible love is about to get darker before it gets beautiful. Nina Carter's fingers ached as she counted the crumpled dollar bills on the diner's counter. $12.37. Not enough for rent, not even close. She rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the clock. Past midnight again. Emily would be waiting at home, probably asleep on the couch with her coloring books scattered around her. Nina's 7-year-old sister never complained about being alone, but that somehow made it worse. The diner was empty except for the cook cleaning the grill in back. Nina untied her apron and grabbed her worn purse. The walk home would take 20 minutes if she hurried. Outside, the October air bit at her skin. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and walked faster. The streetlights flickered in their usual broken pattern, casting strange shadows on the cracked sidewalk. Nina climbed the 3 flights to their apartment, each step echoing in the narrow stairwell. Something felt wrong. The hallway was too quiet, and their door stood slightly open. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Emily never opened the door for strangers. Nina had taught her that rule over and over. "Emily?" she called softly, pushing the door wider. A man sat in their small living room like he owned it. He was big, with cold eyes and hands that looked like they'd hurt people before. Emily was pressed into the corner of the couch, small and silent, her dark eyes wide with fear. "You must be Nina," the man said. His voice was smooth, like honey poured over broken glass. "I'm Victor. We need to talk." Nina stepped between him and Emily without thinking. "Get out of my house." Victor laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Your house? You're 3 months behind on rent, sweetheart. This place isn't yours much longer." "What do you want?" "Respect," he said, standing up slowly. He was even bigger than she'd thought. "You see, your sister here witnessed something she shouldn't have. Down at the corner store last week." Nina's blood turned to ice. She remembered Emily coming home upset, not talking even more than usual. Emily pointed and made gestures sometimes, but she hadn't spoken a word since their parents died 2 years ago. "She can't talk," Nina said. "She can't tell anyone anything." "Maybe not with words," Victor said, "but she's got eyes. Smart little eyes. And the police, they got ways of getting kids to point at pictures. She didn't see anything important. She's just a child." Victor took a step closer. Nina could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. "That's where you're wrong. She saw me put a man in the trunk of my car. A man who won't be coming home to his family." Nina's knees felt weak, but she stayed standing. "What do you want from us?" "Simple. You keep your mouth shut, both of you. You don't talk to cops. You don't talk to teachers. You don't talk to anybody about what happened." His smile was all teeth, no kindness. "And I'll make sure you can stay in this apartment a while longer." "Fine," Nina said quickly. "We won't say anything. I promise." "Promises are pretty words," Victor said, "but I need more than that." Before Nina could ask what he meant, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Pain exploded through her fingers as he twisted and pulled. She heard the bones snap before she felt it. Nina's scream filled the tiny apartment. Emily made a sound like a wounded animal and tried to run to her sister. Victor held Nina's broken hand in his grip. "That's so you remember," he said calmly. "Next time it'll be worse. Next time it might be the little one." He let go, and Nina fell to her knees, cradling her damaged hand against her chest. Victor straightened his jacket like nothing had happened. "I'll be checking on you," he said. "Don't disappoint me." The door closed with a soft click. Nina stayed on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Emily crept over and wrapped her small arms around her sister's shoulders. "It's okay," Nina whispered, though nothing felt okay. "We're okay." But they weren't, and Nina didn't know how to fix it. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. Nina sat on the edge of the bed, her left hand wrapped in white bandages and trapped in a hard splint. 3 fingers broken. The doctor had asked questions she couldn't answer. Emily sat in the plastic chair beside the bed, coloring in a book the nurse had given her. She hadn't looked up once since they'd arrived 6 hours ago. "Miss Carter?" A police officer stood in the doorway. He was young, maybe Nina's age, with kind eyes that reminded her of her father. "I'm Officer Martinez. Can you tell me what happened?" Nina looked at Emily, who had stopped, coloring but kept her head down. "I fell down the stairs." "In your apartment?" "Yes." Officer Martinez pulled out a small notebook. "The neighbors called it in. They said they heard screaming. I screamed when I fell. It hurt." Must have been quite a fall to break 3 fingers like that. Nina met his eyes. "I'm clumsy." He studied her face for a long moment. "Miss Carter, if someone hurt you?" "No one hurt me." "What about your sister? Did she see what happened?" Emily's crayon snapped in her small fist. Nina reached over with her good hand and touched the little girl's shoulder. "Emily doesn't talk," Nina said. "She hasn't spoken since our parents died." "I'm sorry for your loss." Officer Martinez closed his notebook. "If you remember anything else about your fall, or if you need help with anything, here's my card." Nina took the card with her right hand. After he left, she sat in the quiet room with Emily. Through the window, she could see the city lights twinkling like fallen stars. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to Emily. "Somehow, we're going to be okay." Emily finally looked up. Her dark eyes were full of tears. She wouldn't let fall. She pointed to Nina's bandaged hand, then to her own chest, right over her heart. "I know it's scary," Nina said, "but we'll take care of each other. We always do." A man in a dark suit walked past their room. He moved like he owned the hospital, confident and quiet. Something about him made Nina look twice, but he was gone before she could figure out why. Emily had gone back to her coloring book, but Nina noticed she was drawing something new. Not flowers or houses like usual. This picture showed a big man and a small girl, and the man was reaching out his hand. Nina didn't ask what it meant. Sometimes Emily saw things the rest of the world missed. Coming home was harder than Nina had expected. Everything in the apartment looked the same, but it felt different, dangerous, like Victor might be waiting in any shadow. Emily stuck close to her side as they climbed the stairs. Nina's hand throbbed with every heartbeat, making it hard to carry their bag from the hospital. Inside, Nina went straight to the kitchen. She needed to make Emily something to eat, needed to pretend everything was normal. But opening a can of soup with one hand was impossible. "Damn," she muttered, then looked quickly at Emily. "Sorry, honey. Bad word." Emily came over and took the can opener. She was only 7, but she'd learned to help with everything, too much for a little girl. Together they managed to heat the soup on the stove. They ate it sitting on the couch, Emily curled up against Nina's right side. "Tomorrow I'll go back to work," Nina said. "Mr. Peterson will understand about my hand." But Mr. Peterson didn't understand. When Nina showed up at the diner the next evening, her hand still in its splint, he took one look at her and shook his head. "Can't have you working like that," he said. "Liability issue." "What? If you drop hot coffee on someone?" "I can use my other hand. I need this job." "Sorry, Nina. Come back when you're healed up." Nina stood in the parking lot outside the diner, watching through the window as another waitress took her tables. 3 months behind on rent, no job, medical bills piling up. She sat in her car and cried for 5 minutes. Then she wiped her eyes and drove home to Emily. But when she got to their building, something was different. A black car sat across the street, expensive and out of place in their neighborhood. The windows were tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. Nina hurried upstairs, her heart racing again. Emily was safe with Mrs. Rodriguez next door, but Nina felt eyes watching her from somewhere. Inside their apartment, she found a bag of groceries on the kitchen counter. Good groceries, fresh fruit, real meat, bread that wasn't stale. And underneath it all, an envelope. Nina opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was enough cash to pay the rent, all of it, 3 months' worth plus extra. No note, no explanation, just money when she needed it most. Nina sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the bills in her hands. This felt wrong. People didn't just give money to strangers. Someone wanted something from her. Fear crawled up her spine like a cold spider. What if Victor was playing games with her? What if this was another trap? She shoved the money back in the envelope and went to get Emily from next door. They would figure this out together like they figured out everything else. But that night, as they ate the good food someone had left them, Nina couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had just changed in a way she couldn't understand yet. Emily drew more pictures before bed. A tall man in a dark coat, a little girl holding his hand, and Nina standing in a doorway, looking afraid but safe. "Who is that man, Em?" Nina asked softly. Emily pointed to the window, then to her heart. Then she drew a word in careful letters at the bottom of the page. Safe. Nina felt tears burn her eyes. Emily hadn't written a word since their parents' funeral, but somehow she'd found this one. Outside, the black car was still there, waiting in the shadows like a promise or a threat. Nina couldn't tell which. All she knew was that tomorrow, everything would be different. She could feel change coming like a storm on the horizon, bringing with it a man who would turn their small, scared world upside down. Nina held Emily close as they fell asleep, her broken hand aching with every breath. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They always had. The black car stayed all night, watching over them like a dark angel. Nina tried to sleep, but every sound made her jump. The apartment building creaked and settled around them, full of normal nighttime noises that now felt like threats. Emily had finally dozed off against her shoulder on the couch. Nina didn't want to move her to the bedroom. Tonight she needed her sister. Close. Around 3 a.m, Nina heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside their door. Her breath caught in her throat. A soft knock. 3 gentle taps. Nina's heart hammered against her ribs. Victor had kicked the door in before. He wouldn't knock. "Miss Carter?" A man's voice, deep but not harsh. "My name is Marco. I need to speak with you." Nina stood carefully, not waking Emily. She approached the door but didn't open it. "What do you want?" "I want to help. I know what happened to you." "I don't know what you're talking about." Victor Mendez broke your fingers. The man's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. You didn't report it because you're afraid. You should be afraid. But not anymore. Nina pressed her forehead against the cool door. Who are you? Someone who remembers your sister. That made no sense. Emily barely left the apartment except for school. She didn't know any grown men except the teachers and the mailman. I don't understand. 2 years ago, your sister helped a little girl at the diner where you work. The little girl was crying because she'd lost her toy. Emily gave her a flower she'd drawn on a napkin. Nina's chest tightened. She remembered that day. A man in an expensive suit had been eating alone while his daughter sat across from him, tears streaming down her face. Emily had walked right over and handed the little girl one of her drawings. The man had looked surprised, then grateful. The little girl was my boss's daughter. Marco continued. Sophia. She died 3 weeks later in a car accident. She still had Emily's flower in her pocket when we found her. Nina's legs felt weak. She slid down to sit with her back against the door. My boss never forgot your sister's kindness, Marco said. When I saw you at the hospital today, I recognized you both. I called him. Why were you at the hospital? I was visiting someone. I saw you with Emily, saw your hand. I know what Victor's work looks like. Nina closed her eyes. The world was spinning too fast, full of connections she couldn't understand. What do you want from us? Nothing. My boss wants to help. The groceries, the money, that was just the beginning. We don't need charity. This isn't charity. This is honor. Your sister showed kindness to his daughter when she needed it most. Now it's his turn. Nina heard Emily stirring on the couch. Soon she would wake up and wonder why her sister was sitting on the floor by the door, talking to a stranger. I can't trust anyone, Nina whispered. You don't have to trust me. But Victor will come back. You know that. When he does, you'll need protection. From who? Another criminal? Marco was quiet for a moment. Sometimes the only way to fight a monster is with a bigger monster, but this one has honor. This one remembers kindness. Nina stood up slowly, her broken hand aching. Tell your boss thank you for the groceries, but we'll handle this ourselves. You can't handle Victor alone. He's not just some street thug. He works for the Castellanos. They own half the judges in this city and most of the cops. The name made Nina's blood turn cold. Even she had heard of the Castellano family. They ran drugs and guns through the port, owned businesses all over the city. People who crossed them disappeared. Then we'll leave town. With what money? Your job is gone. Your landlord will evict you next week. Where will you go with a 7-year-old who doesn't speak? Every word hit like a punch to the stomach because it was true. Nina had been trying not to think about any of it, but running away took resources they didn't have. What does your boss want in return? She asked. Nothing, just the chance to repay a debt. Emily made a soft sound from the couch. She was waking up. I have to go, Nina said. Think about it, but don't think too long. Victor won't wait forever. The footsteps moved away down the hall. Nina waited until she heard the stairwell door close, then went to Emily. Who was that? Emily's voice was barely a whisper, scratchy from not being used. Nina's heart nearly stopped. Emily had spoken. Actually spoken, not just pointed or made gestures. Just someone who made a mistake, Nina said, sitting down beside her sister. Wrong apartment. Emily looked at her with those 2 old eyes. She knew Nina was lying, but she didn't push. She never did. I'm hungry, Emily said in that rusty little voice. Nina made her scrambled eggs with the good butter someone had left them. As Emily ate, Nina stared out the window at the street below. The black car was gone, but she had the feeling she was still being watched. Emily's voice was the first miracle. But Nina had learned not to trust miracles. They usually came with a price she couldn't afford to pay. Still, as she watched her sister eat real food for the first time in weeks, Nina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, even if it scared her more than the fear. The next morning, Nina woke to Emily shaking her shoulder gently. Sunlight streamed through their thin curtains, and for a moment everything felt normal. "Nina," Emily whispered. Her voice was still scratchy, but hearing it made Nina's heart sing. "Someone's at the door." Nina sat up quickly, her broken hand throbbing. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark suit standing in the hallway. He was tall, with broad shoulders and graying hair at his temples. Everything about him spoke of money and power. This wasn't Marco from last night. This was someone else entirely. Nina's mouth went dry. She knew somehow that this was the boss Marco had talked about, the man whose daughter Emily had helped 2 years ago. "Miss Carter," the man said through the door. His voice was deep and calm. "My name is Alessandro Vitale. I'd like to speak with you." Nina looked back at Emily, who stood by the couch in her pajamas, watching with wide eyes. "We're fine," Nina called, through the door. "We don't need anything." I think we both know that's not true. Nina pressed her forehead against the door. "What do you want?" "To help, and to thank your sister for her kindness to my daughter." "She was just being nice. Kids do that." "Not to my daughter. Sophia was difficult to approach. She was shy, scared of strangers. But Emily saw past that." Nina closed her eyes. She remembered the little girl at the diner, how sad she'd looked. Emily had walked right over without fear, like she always did with hurt things. "That doesn't mean we owe each other anything," Nina said. "You're right, but it means I owe you." Emily tugged on Nina's shirt. When Nina looked down, Emily pointed to the door, then to her own chest, the same gesture she'd made at the hospital. "Nina," Emily whispered, "he feels safe." Nina stared at her sister. Emily hadn't spoken to strangers since their parents died. She barely spoke to Nina. But something about this man made her feel safe enough to use her voice. "Please," Alessandro said. "Just 5 minutes. I know you're afraid." Nina took a deep breath and opened the door. Alessandro Vitale was even more imposing in person. He had dark eyes that seemed to see everything, and scars on his knuckles that told stories Nina didn't want to know. But when he looked at Emily, his entire face softened. "Hello, Emily," he said gently, kneeling down to her level. "Do you remember me?" Emily nodded and stepped closer. To Nina's amazement, she held out her hand to him. Alessandro took it carefully, like he was holding something precious and breakable. "Thank you for being kind to Sophia. She talked about you for days after." Emily pointed to herself, then to him, then made a heart shape with her small hands. "Yes," Alessandro said quietly, "she loved you too." Nina watched this exchange with growing confusion. Emily never trusted strangers. She barely trusted the teachers at school, but with this dangerous-looking man, she acted like she'd found a long-lost uncle. "Mr. Vitale," Nina said, "we appreciate your gratitude, but—" "You're in trouble," he said, standing up but keeping his eyes on Emily. "Victor Mendez is not the kind of man who gives warnings and walks away. He'll be back." "We'll handle it." "How? You lost your job. Your landlord wants you out. You have $17 in your checking account and a sister to protect." Alessandro's voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "What's your plan?" Nina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's none of your business." "You're right, but I'm making it my business anyway." "Why?" Alessandro looked at Emily again. She had gone to get her coloring book and was showing him the pictures she'd drawn. The man in the dark coat, the little girl, the word safe written in careful letters. "Because," he said simply, "when someone shows kindness to your child, you don't forget." even when that child is gone. Nina saw the pain flash across his face before he could hide it. This man had lost his daughter. His whole world had probably collapsed, just like hers had when their parents died. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. Alessandro nodded. "Thank you." Sophia would have been 9 next month. She would have liked to see Emily again. Emily looked up from her coloring book. She tore out one of her drawings, a picture of 2 little girls holding hands under a rainbow. She held it out to Alessandro. His hand shook as he took it. For a moment, Nina thought he might cry, but he just folded the picture carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he whispered to Emily. "I'll keep it always." Emily smiled, the first real smile Nina had seen from her in weeks. "Mr. Vitale," Nina said, "we can't accept your help. We don't want to be in debt to anyone." "Who said anything about debt?" Alessandro stood up, his composure returning. "Consider it a favor between friends." "We're not friends. We don't even know each other." "Then let's change that." He pulled out a business card. "My number. If you need anything at all, you call me." Nina took the card, but didn't look at it. "We won't call." "That's your choice. But Victor will come back, Miss Carter. When he does, you'll need help that the police can't provide." "What makes you so sure he'll come back?" Alessandro's expression darkened. "Because I know Victor. I know how he thinks, how he operates. He hurt you to send a message, but he's not done with that message yet." Fear crawled up Nina's spine, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you mean?" "He'll escalate. Next time won't be just broken bones. Next time he'll take Emily." Nina's world tilted. She looked at her sister, who was drawing again, lost in her own quiet world. "You can't know that." "I can, and I do." Alessandro moved toward the door. "Think about my offer, but don't think too long." He paused in the doorway and looked back at Emily. "Take care of yourself, little one. You're braver than you know." Emily waved goodbye like she was saying farewell to an old friend. After he left, Nina sat heavily on the couch. Her broken hand ached and her head spun with confusion. "Emily," she said, "why weren't you scared of that man?" Emily climbed up beside her and pointed to her heart, then to the door where Alessandro had been. "He feels safe," she said in her whisper voice, "like Daddy used to." Nina's eyes filled with tears. Their father had been a gentleman, nothing like the dangerous stranger who just left their apartment. But if Emily felt safe with Alessandro Vitale, maybe Nina should listen to that instinct. Emily had always been able to see things in people that others missed, good things and bad things. She'd never been wrong before. "What do you think we should do?" Nina asked. Emily picked up her coloring book and turned to a fresh page. She drew quickly, a small apartment, 2 girls, and storm clouds overhead. Then she turned the page and drew the same apartment, the same 2 girls. But this time there was a tall man standing between them and the storm clouds. In the second picture, the sun was shining. Nina stared at the drawings. Even at 7, Emily understood their situation better than Nina wanted to admit. "You think he can help us?" Emily nodded solemnly. Nina looked at Alessandro's business card. It was simple, elegant. Just his name and phone number embossed in gold letters. She thought about Victor's cold eyes and cruel smile, about the way her bones had snapped in his grip, about the threat he'd made about Emily. Then she thought about the groceries that had appeared in their kitchen, the money that had paid their bills, someone who remembered kindness and wanted to repay it. Nina had spent 2 years taking care of Emily alone, 2 years being strong and independent and proud, but pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. She picked up her phone with her good hand. Alessandro answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting for her call. "Miss Carter?" "Nina," she said. "My name is Nina." "Hello, Nina. Have you made a decision?" Nina looked at Emily, who was watching her with those wise, dark eyes. "Emily says you feel safe," Nina said. "She's never wrong about people. She's a smart girl. If we accept your help, what does that mean? What do you want from us?" "I want you both to be safe. I want Emily to keep drawing pictures and using her voice. I want you to stop this looking over your shoulder every time you leave the house." Nina's throat tightened. "And in return?" "Nothing. Sometimes, Nina, people help each other just because it's right." Nina closed her eyes. She was 28 years old, and she'd been taking care of herself and Emily for so long that accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But Emily was more important than her pride. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we accept your help." "Good. Pack a bag for both of you. Just essentials. I'm sending Marco to get you in an hour." "Wait, what? We're not leaving our home." "Yes, you are. Victor's men have been watching your building since yesterday. They're planning something for tonight." Nina's blood turned to ice. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching them watch you. Pack your bags, Nina. It's time to go." The line went dead. Nina stared at the phone, her heart racing. Emily was already moving, gathering her coloring books and the few toys she treasured most, like she'd been expecting this moment. "Emily, wait. It's okay," Emily said softly. "We'll be safe with him. I can feel it." Nina looked around their small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The only home Emily really remembered. But as she started throwing clothes into a bag, she realized that home wasn't a place. Home was wherever she and Emily were together. And if Alessandro Vitale could keep them safe, then maybe it was time to trust someone else for once, even if that someone was the most dangerous man she'd ever met. Outside, the black car had returned. It sat across the street like a patient guardian, waiting to take them somewhere Nina couldn't imagine. But for the first time since Victor had broken her fingers, Nina felt like they might actually survive this. Emily tucked her newest drawing into her backpack, the one with the man standing between them and the storm. In the picture, all three of them were smiling. Marco arrived exactly 1 hour later, just as Alessandro had promised. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and careful hands, the type of person who noticed everything but said little. "Ready?" he asked, taking their bags without being asked. Nina looked around their apartment one more time. The morning sunlight made everything look smaller and shabbier than usual, but it was still theirs. "How long will we be gone?" she asked. Marco's expression was gentle but honest. "I don't know, until it's safe." Emily slipped her hand into Nina's good one and squeezed. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're brave." The ride to Alessandro's house took them through parts of the city Nina had never seen. Wide streets lined with old trees, houses set back behind iron gates, gardens that probably cost more to maintain than Nina made in a year. Emily pressed her face to the window, watching the world change around them. "It's like a fairy tale," she said softly. Nina's stomach knotted tighter with every mile. This wasn't their world. They didn't belong here. Alessandro's estate sat behind tall stone walls, with guards at the gate who waved Marco through without question. The house itself was enormous, all clean lines and expensive materials. Nina counted at least 20 windows on the front side alone. "This is too much," she told Marco as they pulled into the circular driveway. "We can't stay here." "Mr. Vitale thought you might say that," Marco replied. "He asked me to tell you that Sophia would have wanted Emily to be safe. That's all this is." Emily was already out of the car, staring up at the house with wonder. A woman in a neat uniform came out to greet them, the housekeeper, Nina guessed. "I'm Mrs. Chen," the woman said warmly. "Welcome. Mr. Vitale is waiting for you inside." The inside of the house was even more overwhelming than the outside. High ceilings, artwork that looked like it belonged in museums, furniture that probably cost more than Nina's car. Alessandro appeared in the doorway of what looked like a library. He'd changed from his suit into dark jeans and a simple white shirt, but he still carried himself like a man who owned the world. Nina, Emily. He nodded to them both. How was the drive? Long, Nina said honestly. I imagine this all feels overwhelming. A little. Alessandro's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Emily, would you like to see the garden while your sister and I talk? Emily looked to Nina for permission. Nina nodded, even though the thought of letting Emily out of her sight made her chest tight. Mrs. Chen. We'll stay with you, Alessandro added, like he understood Nina's fear. After Emily left with the housekeeper, Alessandro led Nina into a sitting room that was smaller and somehow warmer than the rest of the house. Sit, he said, gesturing to a comfortable-looking chair. Please. Nina perched on the edge of the seat, ready to run if she needed to. This is too much. We can't stay here. Why not? Because... Nina gestured around them. Look at this place. Look at us. We don't fit. You're guests in my home. There's nothing more natural than that. Guests leave after a few days. You're talking about something longer. Alessandro sat across from her, his dark eyes serious. Victor escalated faster than I expected. His people tried to break into your apartment building last night. Mrs. Rodriguez scared them off with her dog, but they'll be back. Nina's heart clenched. Mrs. Rodriguez was 70 years old and lived alone. Is she okay? She's fine, but she can't protect you forever. Nina stared down at her bandaged hand. 3 days ago, her biggest worry had been making rent. Now she was sitting in a mansion, talking to a man who probably had more money than she could count, while criminals tried to break down her door. I don't understand any of this, she admitted. Why does Victor care so much about Emily? She's just a little girl. Because he thinks she can identify him, and because men like Victor don't like loose ends. She can't identify anyone. She doesn't talk to strangers. She's talking now. Nina looked up sharply. What do you mean? She spoke to me this morning. She spoke to Mrs. Chen in the car. Emily is finding her voice again. Nina. That makes her dangerous to Victor. A chill ran down Nina's spine. Emily's miracle, her return to speaking, might be the very thing that put her in more danger. So what do you suggest? That we hide here forever? I suggest we take care of the Victor problem permanently. Something in Alessandro's tone made Nina's blood run cold. What does that mean? It means you don't need to worry about it. No. Nina stood up quickly. No, I won't have violence done in our name. That's not who we are. Alessandro studied her for a long moment. Who are you, Nina? The question caught her off guard. What? You've spent 2 years raising your sister alone. You work double shifts to pay bills. You put yourself between Emily and danger without thinking twice. You're stronger than most men I know. He leaned forward slightly. But you won't let me protect you the way I know how. Because your way involves hurting people. Victor hurt you. He threatened Emily. He's planning to hurt you both again. That doesn't make it right. Doesn't it? They stared at each other across the elegant room. Nina saw something dangerous flash in Alessandro's eyes, but also something else. Respect, maybe. You really believe that? He said finally. Yes. Even after what he did to you? Nina looked down at her, broken hand. Especially after what he did to me. I won't become like him. Alessandro was quiet for a long time. You know, Sophia used to say things like that. She believed people should be kind, even when the world wasn't kind back. She sounds like a special little girl. She was. Alessandro's voice grew soft. She would have liked you. Before Nina could respond, Emily burst through the door, her eyes bright with excitement. Nina, there's a fountain with fish in it and a swing hanging from a big tree, and Mrs. Chen says there are horses. Nina couldn't help but smile at her sister's enthusiasm. Horses? Just two, Alessandro said. They're old and gentle. Sophia used to feed them apples. Emily grabbed Nina's good hand. Can we see them, please? Nina looked from Emily's hopeful face to Alessandro's carefully neutral expression. I suppose we could look. The gardens were even more beautiful than the house. Rolling lawns, flower beds that looked like paintings, and yes, a fountain with actual fish swimming in it. Emily ran from wonder to wonder, her laughter ringing across the grounds. Alessandro walked beside Nina, keeping pace with her slower steps. She's happy, he observed. She hasn't been this excited about anything in months. What about you? Nina glanced at him. What about me? When was the last time you were happy? The question hit her like a physical blow. Nina realized she couldn't remember. Since their parents died, her whole life had been about survival, about making sure Emily had food and shelter and safety. There hadn't been room for happiness. I don't know, she admitted. That's what I thought. They found the horses in a paddock behind the main house. They were beautiful animals, one black and one white, grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. Emily approached the fence fearlessly. Hello, horses, she said in her soft voice. The black horse lifted its head and walked over to her. Emily reached through the fence to touch its nose, giggling when it snuffled against her palm. His name is Shadow, Alessandro said. The white one is Luna. Did Sophia name them? She did. Alessandro pulled an apple from his pocket and handed it to Emily. Here, Shadow loves apples. Emily took the apple and held it out on her flat palm, just like Alessandro showed her. Shadow took it gently, crunching it between his big teeth. He's so soft, Emily said, stroking the horse's neck. Nina watched her sister, seeing a piece in Emily's face that had been missing for too long. In this beautiful place, surrounded by gentle animals and kind people, Emily looked like the child she was supposed to be. She fits here, Alessandro said quietly. This isn't our world. Why not? Because you didn't grow up with money? Because you work for a living? Alessandro turned to face her. I grew up in the worst part of the city, Nina. I've seen things that would give you nightmares. Money doesn't make someone better or worse. It's just money. It's not just about money. It's about... Nina struggled to find the words. This is your world. You have power, influence, people who do what you say. We're nobody. You're wrong. Am I? Alessandro was quiet for a moment, watching Emily feed another apple to Luna. Do you know what I saw the day Emily helped Sophia? What? A little girl who had every reason to be angry at the world, choosing kindness instead. Your parents were dead. You were struggling to survive. But Emily saw another child in pain and decided to help. Alessandro looked at Nina. That's not nobody. That's everything. Nina felt tears threatening. You don't understand. We can't just stay here and play house. This isn't real life. What is real life then? Working yourself to death at a job that doesn't pay enough? Living in fear? Watching Emily retreat further into herself? That's not fair. Isn't it? Look at her, Nina. Really look at her. Nina did. Emily was chattering away to the horses, telling them about her drawings, her voice clear and happy. She looked alive in a way she hadn't since their parents died. She's safe here, Alessandro continued. She's healing. You both are. And what happens when Victor is gone? Do we just stay here forever? Become your charity cases? You'd never be charity cases. Alessandro's voice was firm. You'd be family. The word hung in the air between them. Family. Nina hadn't had a real family since their parents died. It had just been her and Emily fighting the world alone. "I don't know how to be family with someone like you," Nina said honestly. "Someone like me?" "Someone dangerous, someone who solves problems with violence." Alessandro nodded slowly. "That's fair, but I'm trying to be better. For Sophia's memory, for Emily, for you." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you can teach me about kindness, and maybe I can teach you that it's okay to let someone else be strong sometimes." Nina looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the expensive clothes and dangerous reputation, she saw something she hadn't expected. Loneliness. The same kind of deep, aching loneliness that kept her awake at night. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of trusting you and being wrong. Of Emily getting hurt. Of losing the only family I have left." "You won't lose Emily. I promise you that." "How can you promise something like that?" Alessandro pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was Emily's drawing from that morning, 2 little girls holding hands under a rainbow. "Because," he said, "someone who taught my daughter about love in her final days deserves to be loved in return. Both of you." Emily came running over to them, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "Nina, the horses like me. Alessandro says I can ride them tomorrow if you say yes." Nina looked down at her sister's shining face, then at Alessandro's quietly hopeful expression. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to trust. "We'll see," she said, and watched Emily's smile grow even brighter. As they walked back toward the house, Emily between them, Nina felt something she hadn't felt in years. Like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Behind them, Shadow and Luna watched from their paddock, guardian angels in horse form, keeping watch over the little girl who'd brought laughter back to their quiet world. The first week at Alessandro's house passed like a dream Nina was afraid to wake up from. Emily bloomed like a flower in sunshine, chattering to Mrs. Chen while they baked cookies, reading stories to the horses and drawing pictures that showed happy families instead of storm clouds. Nina found herself relaxing despite her best efforts to stay guarded. Alessandro was nothing like she'd expected. He was gentle with Emily, respectful with Nina, and surprisingly domestic for a man who commanded an empire. She watched him help Emily with a puzzle one evening, his large hands careful with the tiny pieces, and something shifted in her chest. Something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying. "He's different than I thought he'd be," she told Marco one afternoon as they sat in the garden watching Emily play. Marco smiled. "He wasn't always like this. After Sophia and Maria died, he was dark, angry at everything. But Emily's brought something back in him." "What happened to them? His wife and daughter?" Marco's expression grew sad. "Car accident. A rival family wanted to send Alessandro a message. They rigged the brakes on Maria's car while she was picking Sophia up from school." Nina's blood went cold. "They killed a woman and a child to hurt him? This business, it doesn't care about innocence." Marco looked at her seriously. "That's why Alessandro is so protective of you and Emily. He couldn't save his first family. He won't lose his second one. We're not his family. Aren't you?" Nina didn't know how to answer that. They weren't related by blood or marriage, but living in Alessandro's house, eating meals together, watching Emily laugh at his stories, it felt more like family than anything she'd experienced since their parents died. That evening, Alessandro knocked on her bedroom door. Nina opened it to find him holding a cup of tea and looking uncertain. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too quiet," Nina admitted. "I'm used to sirens and neighbors arguing." "May I come in?" Nina nodded and stepped aside. Alessandro sat in the chair by the window while Nina perched on the edge of the bed. "Emily's asleep?" he asked. Finally, she wanted to say goodnight to the horses first. She's remarkable, like her sister. Nina felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm nothing special. You're wrong. Alessandro set down his teacup and looked at her directly. You've raised an extraordinary child while dealing with your own grief. You've kept her safe and kind and brave. That's everything. I haven't kept her safe. That's why we're here. You did your best with what you had. No one could ask for more. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, the garden was peaceful under the moon, nothing like the harsh city streets Nina was used to. Alessandro, she said finally. What happens next? With Victor, I mean. His jaw tightened slightly. You don't need to worry about Victor. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. Because you're going to have him killed? Alessandro was quiet for a long time. Would that bother you? Yes, no, I don't know. Nina rubbed her temples. He hurt me. He threatened Emily. Part of me wants him to pay for that. But part of me knows that violence only leads to more violence. Sometimes violence is the only language men like Victor understand. But then, what makes you different from him? Intent, Alessandro said simply. Victor hurts people for pleasure and profit. I hurt people to protect the innocent. Is that enough? To make it right? I don't know, but it's all I have. Nina studied his face in the moonlight. She saw regret there, and pain, and something else she couldn't quite name. Do you ever wish you could walk away from all of this? She asked. Every day. But this is the only life I know. The only way I know how to protect people I care about. People like us. People like you. The way he said it made Nina's heart skip. There was something in his voice, something tender and careful and hopeful. Alessandro, I know, he said quickly. I know this is complicated. I know you have every reason not to trust me. But Nina, I need you to know. What I feel for you and Emily, it's real. You're not just some debt I'm paying to my dead daughter. Nina's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time since Maria died, I feel alive. You and Emily have brought light back into this house. Into me. Nina stared at him. You barely know us. I know that Emily has nightmares about losing you, and you sing to her until she falls back asleep. I know you eat the last piece of bread so she can have it, even when you're still hungry. I know you cry sometimes when you think no one can hear you, and that you're the strongest person I've ever met. Tears blurred Nina's vision. You can't know all that. I notice everything about you, Nina. I notice how you protect Emily without even thinking about it. I notice how you see good in people even when they don't deserve it. I notice how beautiful you are when you smile, which isn't nearly often enough. Alessandro, stop. Why? Because this is crazy. You're you, and I'm nobody. A waitress with a mute sister and $17 in the bank. Alessandro stood up and moved to sit beside her on the bed, careful to keep space between them. Look at me, he said gently. Nina raised her eyes to his. You are not nobody. You are Nina Carter. You are brave and kind and fierce and beautiful. You are the woman who taught my daughter about love. You are the woman who's teaching me about it now. This can't work. Why not? Because your world is dangerous. Because Emily needs stability, not chaos. Because I don't know how to love someone who carries a gun. Alessandro nodded slowly. Those are all good reasons. But Emily is happier here than I've seen her since you arrived, and you sleep through the night now, which you didn't do before. And when you laugh at dinner, it's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Nina felt herself weakening. What are you asking me? I'm asking you to stay. Not as guests, not as people I'm protecting. Stay as family. Stay because this house is empty without you. Stay because Emily deserves to grow up somewhere safe and beautiful. Stay because... Because what? Because I'm falling in love with you, and I think you might be falling in love with me too. Nina's heart hammered against her ribs. I am, she whispered, and it terrifies me. Alessandro reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face with gentle fingers. It terrifies me too, he admitted. But maybe that means it's real. Before Nina could change her mind, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and careful and full of all the longing she'd been trying to ignore. When they broke apart, Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. I'll think about it. That's all I can ask. The next morning, Nina woke to shouting outside her window. She looked out to see Marco running across the lawn toward the house, his face grim. Alessandro met him at the back door, already dressed and alert despite the early hour. Nina couldn't hear their words, but she could see the tension in both men's bodies. Her stomach dropped. Something was wrong. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, finding Alessandro in the kitchen making coffee with steady hands. What's happening? She asked. Nothing you need to worry about. Don't lie to me. Marco looked scared, and Marco doesn't scare easily. Alessandro sighed and turned to face her. Victor's people found your old apartment. They burned it. Nina felt the blood drain from her face. Mrs. Rodriguez is fine. She wasn't home. But Nina, they left a message. What kind of message? Alessandro pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. Spray painted on the charred wall of her former home were 4 words. We know where they are. Nina sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. They know we're here. We think so. What does that mean for us? Alessandro knelt beside her chair, taking her good hand in both of his. It means we have to end this. Today. How? Let me worry about that. No. Nina stood up abruptly. No more secrets. If Emily and I are in danger, I need to know everything. Alessandro studied her for a moment, then nodded. Victor is coming here. Tonight, probably. He's bringing at least 6 men, maybe more. Then we'll leave. We'll run. Where? He's got connections everywhere. Police, judges, other families. There's nowhere to run, Nina. So what do you suggest? I make sure he never threatens you again. Nina saw the deadly intent in his eyes and felt a chill. You're going to kill him. If I have to. And his men? If I have to. And then what? His family comes after us? Other enemies? When does it end? Alessandro was quiet for a moment. I don't know. Nina stared at him. This was the reality of loving a man like Alessandro Vitale. This would always be their life, looking over their shoulders, waiting for the next threat. Emily, she said suddenly. Where is she? Safe. Mrs. Chen took her to the stable. Marco's with them. I need to see her. Of course. They walked to the stables together, the morning air crisp and clean. Nina found Emily brushing Shadow's coat while Mrs. Chen looked on with a smile. Nina! Emily ran over, her face bright with innocence. Look how shiny Shadow is. Mrs. Chen says we can have a picnic lunch by the pond. Nina knelt down and pulled Emily into a fierce hug. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Emily pulled back to look at her. Why do you look sad? I'm not sad. I'm just thinking. About what? Nina glanced at Alessandro, who was watching them with pain in his eyes. He knew what she was thinking. He knew what she was going to choose. About how much I love you, Nina said, smoothing Emily's hair. I love you too, and I love it here. Can we stay forever? Nina's heart broke a little. We'll see, baby. Emily seemed to sense something in her tone because her smile faded. Are we leaving? I don't know yet. I don't want to leave. I like Alessandro. I like the horses. I like feeling safe. I know, Em. I like it here too. Then why can't we stay? Nina looked at Alessandro again. He was standing apart from them, his hands in his pockets, his expression carefully neutral, but she could see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. Because sometimes loving someone means protecting them, Nina said softly. Even if it makes you sad. Emily frowned. That doesn't make sense. It will when you're older. But as Nina watched her sister return to brushing the horse, she wondered if she was making the right choice. Emily was happier here than she'd been in years. She was speaking again, laughing again, being a child again. Was Nina's fear more important than Emily's happiness? That afternoon, while Emily napped, Nina found Alessandro in his study. He was sitting behind his desk, staring at nothing. Are you planning your war? She asked. Something like that. Nina sat down across from him. What if we stayed? Alessandro's head snapped up. What? What if we stayed and faced this together? What if instead of me running away from your world, you tried to find a way out of it? Nina, you can't ask me to. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm asking you to try. For Emily. For us. Alessandro leaned forward. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe there's a third option we haven't considered. You say violence is the only language men like Victor understand. But what if we spoke a different language? Such as? What if we gave the police everything they need to put Victor away forever? What if we did this legally? Alessandro shook his head. Victor owns half the cops in this city. He'd be out in a week. Not if we go to the FBI, not if we give them evidence of everything, his connections, his crimes, his threats. You don't understand how this world works, Nina. Then explain it to me. Alessandro was quiet for a long moment. If I cooperate with the FBI, I go down too. I'm not innocent in this, Nina. I've done things, terrible things. If I help them put Victor away, they'll want me next? What if that's the price of a real life? What if that's what it takes to be free? You're asking me to destroy everything I've built. I'm asking you to build something better. They stared at each other across the desk. Nina could see the war raging behind Alessandro's eyes, between the man he'd always been and the man he might become. I can't promise I can change, he said finally. I can't promise I can stay if you don't try. And Emily? Nina's heart clenched. Emily deserves a father who chooses love over violence. She deserves to grow up without looking over her shoulder. If you can't give her that, then you'll take her away. Then I'll take her away. Alessandro nodded slowly. That's fair. Is it? Because it's breaking my heart. Mine too. Before either of them could say anything else, Marco burst through the door. Boss, he said urgently, we've got a problem. Victor's here, now. Alessandro was on his feet instantly. How many? Looks like 8 men. They're at the front gate. Nina felt her world tilt. Emily is safe, Alessandro said firmly. Marco, get Nina and Emily to the safe room, now. What safe room? Nina asked. Hidden behind the library. Reinforced steel, separate communication system. You'll be safe there. What about you? Alessandro was already moving, pulling a gun from his desk drawer. I'm going to end this. Alessandro, no. Nina grabbed his arm. This is exactly what I was talking about. There has to be another way. Not anymore. They came to my home. They threatened my family. I'm not your family if you do this. Alessandro stopped and looked at her. What? If you go out there with guns, if you handle this the way you've always handled things, then we're not your family. We're just more casualties of war. Nina, they will kill you. They will kill Emily. This isn't a game. Then call the police. Real police, FBI agents. Someone. There's no time. There's always time to choose who you want to be. Alessandro stared at her, his jaw tight with frustration and fear. Outside, they could hear vehicles pulling into the driveway. "Boss," Marco said urgently, "we need to move." Alessandro looked from Nina to the window, where Victor's men were probably surrounding the house, then back to Nina's desperate face. "Please," she whispered, "choose us. Choose the man Emily thinks you are." For a moment, Nina thought he would do it. She saw something shift in his expression, saw him waver on the edge of a different choice. Then gunfire erupted outside. The choice was made for all of them. But this time, Nina didn't run. This time, she stayed to fight for the family she'd found in the most unlikely place. This time, love would have to be stronger than fear. The gunfire shattered the afternoon quiet like breaking glass. Alessandro pushed Nina behind his desk as windows exploded inward, sending crystal fragments across the hardwood floor. "The safe room!" he shouted over the chaos. "Now!" But Nina was already running, not toward safety, but toward the door. "Emily!" Alessandro caught her arm. "Marco has her. She's safe." "You don't know that!" More gunshots rang out, closer this time. Alessandro's security team was firing back, their voices sharp with commands Nina couldn't understand. "Nina, listen to me." Alessandro gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I need you to trust me. One more time." "I can't lose her." "You won't, but I need you safe so I can end this." Before Nina could argue, Marco appeared in the doorway, his shirt torn and his face grim. "Boss, they're in the house. North wing." "Emily?" Nina demanded. "Safe room with Mrs. Chen, hidden and locked down." Marco looked at Alessandro. "But they've got the exits covered. We're pinned." Alessandro's expression hardened into something Nina had never seen before. Not anger, something colder and more dangerous. "How many men do we have?" he asked. "6, counting you and me. They've got us outnumbered." Nina watched this exchange with growing horror. These men were talking about a war zone, and her sister was trapped somewhere in the middle of it. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. Alessandro looked at her, his dark eyes full of regret. "I tried, Nina. I really tried to be the man you wanted me to be, but some problems can only be solved one way." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Detective Morrison, it's Vitale. I'm ready to make that deal we talked about. Yes, now, because Victor Mendez is shooting up my house with innocent people inside." Nina stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Choosing you," he said simply. "Choosing Emily. Choosing us." The phone conversation was brief and conducted in code words Nina didn't understand. But when Alessandro hung up, his face was set with grim determination. "FBI will be here in 20 minutes, he told Marco. "We just have to hold out that long." "Boss, if you cooperate with the feds, then I cooperate. Some things are more important than business." Another burst of gunfire, this one from upstairs. Nina flinched and grabbed Alessandro's arm. "What about Emily?" "The safe room is soundproof and bulletproof. She can't hear any of this." Alessandro's voice was gentle despite the chaos around them. "She thinks she's playing hide-and-seek with Mrs. Chen." Somehow, that small kindness made Nina's eyes fill with tears. Even in the middle of a war, Alessandro was protecting Emily's innocence. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now we wait, and we trust each other." The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Alessandro's men held defensive positions throughout the house, while Victor's people tried to break through. Nina crouched behind the heavy desk in Alessandro's study, listening to her new world tear itself apart. Alessandro stayed beside her, calm and steady despite the violence raging around them. Twice he returned fire when shadows appeared at the broken windows, but mostly he just waited, his body positioned between Nina and any possible danger. "Why are you doing this?" she asked during a brief lull in the shooting. "Really?" "Because you were right," he said, without looking away from the window. "Emily deserves better. You deserve better. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, I can become the kind of man who deserves you." Alessandro. "I love you, Nina. I love you and Emily more than I've ever loved anything, even more than this life I built." He finally looked at her, his eyes fierce and certain. "You taught me that some things are worth losing everything for." Before Nina could respond, sirens wailed in the distance. Not just police sirens, the deeper, more authoritative sound of federal vehicles. "About time?" Marco muttered from his position by the door. The gunfire outside changed rhythm, becoming more desperate and scattered. Victor's men had realized they were about to be surrounded. Alessandro's phone rang. "Vitale. Yes, they're here. 3rd floor, east wing. 5 minutes." He hung up and looked at Nina. "It's almost over." "What happens next? To you, I mean?" Alessandro's smile was sad but peaceful. "I don't know. Probably prison, at least for a while. But that's okay. Emily will be safe. You'll be safe. That's all that matters." "No," Nina said fiercely. "That's not all that matters. You matter. We need you." "Nina, listen to me. I spent 2 years believing I had to handle everything alone, but I was wrong. Emily and I were not complete without you now. You're part of us." Alessandro stared at her. "Even if I go to prison?" "Even if you go to prison, we'll wait." "That could be years." "Then we'll wait years. Emily's already lost 2 fathers. I won't let her lose a 3rd. Alessandro's composure finally cracked. He pulled Nina into his arms, holding her tight against his chest as the sounds of battle faded around them. "I love you," he whispered into her hair, "both of you, so much." "We love you too," Nina whispered back, "all of you, even the broken parts." The gunfire stopped entirely. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house, accompanied by shouted commands and the metallic click of handcuffs. "Alessandro Vitale," a voice called out. "FBI, we're coming in." Alessandro released Nina and stood up, his hands visible and empty. "In here." Federal agents in tactical gear filled the study, weapons drawn but not aimed. Their leader was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. "Agent Sarah Morrison," she introduced herself. "Mr. Vitale, you're under arrest. But given the circumstances and your cooperation, you'll be processed gently." "The little girl," Alessandro said immediately. "Emily Carter. She's in the safe room with my housekeeper. She's been through trauma before. Please be careful with her." Agent Morrison nodded. "We'll have child services handle the extraction. Is there family to take custody?" "I'm her guardian," Nina said, stepping forward. "Nina Carter." "Miss Carter, you'll need to come with us for questioning. But you're not under arrest." Nina looked at Alessandro, who was already being handcuffed by another agent. "What about him?" "That depends on how cooperative he is, and how much evidence he can provide about Victor Mendez's organization." "I'll give you everything," Alessandro said without hesitation. "Financial records, contacts, operations. Everything you need to shut them down permanently." Agent Morrison studied him. "That's quite an offer. What do you want in return?" Alessandro looked at Nina, then at the agents surrounding him. Protection for Nina and Emily Carter. New identities if necessary. Complete safety. "And for yourself?" "Nothing. I just want them safe." Agent Morrison exchanged glances with her team. "We'll discuss terms. But first, we need to process the scene and get statements from everyone." They led Alessandro away in handcuffs, but he managed to catch Nina's eye as they passed. "Check on Emily," he said. "Tell her I'm okay. Tell her I'll see her soon." Nina nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will." "And Nina? Don't give up on us. This isn't over." "I know," she whispered. "It's just beginning." As the FBI agents escorted them through the house, Nina saw the aftermath of the battle. Broken furniture, shattered glass, bullet holes in walls that had been beautiful an hour before. But underneath it all, she could still feel the warmth and love that had made this place home. They found Emily in the safe room, coloring peacefully with Mrs. Chen while children's music played softly in the background. She looked up when the door opened, her face bright with innocent curiosity. "Nina, are we done playing hide-and-seek?" Emily ran to her sister, completely unaware of the chaos that had surrounded them. "Yes, sweetheart, we're done hiding." "Where's Alessandro?" Nina knelt down to Emily's level, choosing her words carefully. "He had to go help some people with an important job, but he wanted me to tell you he loves you very much. Will he come back?" Nina thought about Alessandro's promise, about Agent Morrison's careful questions, about the long road ahead of them. "Yes," she said firmly. "He'll come back. It might take a while, but he'll come back." "Good," Emily said, settling back into Nina's arms. "I drew him a picture. Shadow and Luna miss him already." Nina looked at the drawing Emily held up, a man in a dark suit, standing with a woman and a little girl in front of a big house. They were all holding hands, and above them Emily had written in careful letters, "Family." "It's beautiful, Em. He'll love it." As they were escorted from the house, Nina looked back one more time at the place where she'd learned to trust again, to love again, to hope for something better. The gardens were trampled and the windows were broken, but the foundation was still strong. Like the family they'd built inside those walls, it would take more than one battle to destroy what Alessandro had created. Nina held Emily close as they climbed into the federal vehicle, their future uncertain, but their love unshakable. Behind them, the horses watched from their paddock, patient and faithful, waiting for their family to come home. And somewhere in the city, in a federal holding facility, Alessandro Vitale sat in a small room and planned his redemption, one truth at a time. The war was over. The real fight was just beginning. But this time, love would win. Because that's what families do. They fight for each other, no matter what. And Alessandro had finally learned what Nina and Emily had always known. Some things are worth fighting for, even if it costs you everything, especially then. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of their new apartment, smaller than Alessandro's mansion, but bright and warm and safe. Nina made pancakes while Emily sat at the kitchen table, drawing pictures for the man they visited every Sunday. The doorbell rang, and Emily jumped up with excitement. "Is it time?" Nina checked the clock. "Almost. Let me get the door." She opened it to find Marco standing in the hallway, holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing a genuine smile. "Ready for visiting day?" he asked. Emily bounced on her toes. "I finished my picture. Look!" She held up her latest drawing, a man in prison clothes standing behind bars, but the bars were made of flowers, and a woman and little girl stood outside with their hands pressed against the glass. Above them, Emily had written, "Waiting for you." "He's going to love that," Marco said gently. During the drive to the federal facility, Emily chattered about her new school, her friends, and the kitten Mrs. Chen had brought them the week before. Nina listened with half her attention, the other half focused on the man they were about to see. Alessandro's cooperation with the FBI had been complete and devastating to Victor's organization. Victor himself was dead, killed resisting arrest, and his network had crumbled within weeks. The Castellano family had collapsed entirely, their assets seized and their leaders behind bars. In return, Alessandro had received a reduced sentence and the promise of protection for Nina and Emily. 5 years instead of 20. a chance at redemption instead of life behind bars. Will he look different? Emily asked as they walked through the security checkpoints. Maybe a little, Nina said, but he'll still be our Alessandro. The visiting room was bright and clean, nothing like the dark, scary prisons Nina had seen in movies. When Alessandro appeared, Emily ran to him immediately. Alessandro! She threw herself into his arms, and he lifted her up, spinning her around like always. There's my beautiful girl, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I missed you so much. I missed you too. Look what I drew. Alessandro examined Emily's picture with the same careful attention he'd always given her artwork. This is magnificent. Can I keep it? Of course. I drew you horses too. Shadow and Luna say hello. How are they? Good. Marco takes me to visit them every week. They remember you. Alessandro looked over Emily's head at Nina, who was hanging back slightly. The past 6 months had been hard on all of them, but especially on her. Raising Emily alone again, dealing with the media attention, adjusting to a new life, it had taken its toll. Hello, beautiful, he said softly. Hello yourself. Nina stepped closer, letting him wrap one arm around her while Emily chattered about her week. They talked about small things. Emily's progress in school, Nina's new job at a family law clinic, Marco's weekly reports on the estate that still waited for Alessandro's return. But underneath it all was the deeper conversation they'd been having for months. The careful rebuilding of trust. The patient work of becoming a family despite the bars between them. I have news, Alessandro said when Emily was distracted by the vending machine in the corner. The parole board met yesterday. Nina's heart stopped. And? Good behavior, continued cooperation, exemplary rehabilitation. Alessandro's smile was cautious but hopeful. They're recommending early release, 18 months instead of 3 years. Nina felt tears start to fall. Really? Really? I'll be home for Emily's 9th birthday. Home? If you'll have me. I know it's been hard, Nina. I know you've been taking care of everything alone again. If you've changed your mind. Nina silenced him with a kiss, right there in the federal visiting room, not caring who saw them. I haven't changed my mind, she said against his lips. I told you we'd wait. Emily told you we'd wait. We meant it. When they broke apart, Emily was watching them with a knowing smile. Are you getting married when Alessandro comes home? She asked. Nina laughed, wiping her eyes. We haven't talked about that yet, sweetheart. Well, you should, Emily said matter-of-factly. Shadow and Luna want to be in the wedding. They told me. Alessandro looked at Nina with love and hope and something that looked like a proposal in his eyes. What do you think? Want to make this official? I think, Nina said carefully, that Emily's right. The horses have spoken. Alessandro's laugh filled the visiting room, rich and warm and full of joy. Then I guess I better start planning a wedding, a small one. Just family. Just family, Nina agreed. As their visiting time came to an end, Emily hugged Alessandro tight and whispered something in his ear that made him smile. What did she say? Nina asked as they watched him walk away. Emily took her sister's hand and looked up with those wise, dark eyes. I told him that home isn't a place. It's people who love you even when you make mistakes. Nina squeezed Emily's hand. That's very wise. I learned it from you and from him. They walked out of the federal facility into the bright afternoon sun, their hearts full of hope and plans and the patient certainty of love that endures. 18 months felt like nothing compared to the lifetime they had ahead of them. And somewhere in the distance, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the soft whinny of horses waiting in a garden, keeping watch over a home that would soon be complete again. Love had won, just like Nina had always believed it would, just like it always does when people are brave enough to choose it.